Now that we selected the key items, the next step is to select a random sample from the non-key items. Let's first collapse the select key item sequence. And now we are going to the randomly select non-key item sequence. And we can double click to get inside. Now, I want to first talk about the method of selecting a random sample from the non-key items. So in the earlier section, we created a imaginary new column of key item. So here I'm just visualizing the procedure for you, and you do not need to actually add the column in your spreadsheet. So just look at what I do here. So in the earlier video, we added this key item to our DT pop data, and we assign values of either 0 or 1s to the transactions, right? And if a transaction hits the limit of the selection criteria, we assign the key item the value as 1, right? So I'm just giving random examples here. So for example, these are 0s and 1s, and so on and so forth. And we filter the transactions by the key item column, and we basically selected the ones that have value for the key item as 1 and include them as the key item transactions. And now for the rest of the transactions, meaning for the transactions whose key item is 0, we are going to select a random sample from them. So first of all, we are going to use the filter function again, but instead of getting all the key items, the 1s, we are going to use all the 0s, right? Because we are going to select from the rest of them. So that's our first step. And then let's say we get all the 0s, but how can we randomly select 25 of them? So one method is that, for example, these are all non-key items, and we need to randomly select 25 of them. So here, we are going to use a random number generator to generate some random numbers between, let's say, 1 to 1,000. And so let's say this transaction, we have this random number of 34, and then we have 21, 7, 5, 34, and then 98. So we have this random number generator to generate a random number for each transaction. And then we sort, so let's say this column is called random. And then we can sort the transactions by the random column. And let's say after we sort the transactions, so here in this way, for example, after we sort them and we have these transactions reorganized, so let's say we have this ranking here, so on and so forth, and we are going to get the first 25 transactions using this ranking. And to simplify our work, we can also create a new column called random index. And this one will be, we will use the index of the rows. For example, the index usually starts from 0. So the first transaction will be indexed as 0, and then 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, so on and so forth. And until it hits 25, here the index is going to be here. So the automation will select these transactions. Here I really simplify the whole process, but the idea is that we first use all the non-key item transactions, and we use a random number generator to assign a random number to each transaction. And then we rank all these transactions in either descending or ascending order by the random number. So here I show you an example of ranking the transactions by in an ascending way. And we create another column named the random index, and then we re-index these transactions. And we select the first 25 of them. And in this way, we can achieve this random sample selection. And here, the random sample selection is actually achieved by the random number assigned to each transaction, right? And later, when we use the sorting, we're just simplifying we're just making our life easier to select the sample. So let me clear my work here, and let's operationalize the procedure I mentioned here in the UiPath. Okay, now let's go back to our UiPath. Here inside the randomly select non-key items, first of all, we need to filter out the transactions of the non-key items. So let's use the filter data table activity. And in the filter wizard, we also choose keep. And then for the column, it's key item. For the operation, it's equal. And here the value is 0 because now we are dealing with the non-key items. We can also put the input and output data here. So here in the input data table, it's DT pop data. For the output data table, let's create a new variable of DT non-key item. You can also you can do the same thing in the property side, but since they have options here, we can do it here. And now click OK. Now we are going to add the column of random and random index to the DT non-key item data table that we just filtered out. So here, let's use an add data column activity right after the filter data table. In the properties section, for the column name, let's assign a new column of random. And this is the column where we are going to assign a random number to each activity. Data table is going to be the DT non-key item. Now, let's create a random number here. So we are going to use assign activity. In the true side, let's use a Control K and let's create a new variable named random number. And in the VB section, let's use new space random and in parentheses. Now we have this error message because here we need to reset the variable type of the random number. Now let's go to the variable section. And we can see that we have the DT non-item, the data table that we just created, and the random number we created. So here, let's first change the scope into flowchart. And also, we need to change the variable type of the random number into random number. So let's go to the drop-down list and browse for types and search for random. And here, let's choose the random from the system here. Okay, now the error message is gone. The next step is going to be assigning a random number to each non-item transaction. So here we are going to use a for each row activity. For each row in the DT non-key item, we are going to assign the value of the random row. So it's going to be row.item in parentheses random. We are going to assign that with the random number. And here, please just follow me to type in the following VB expression. Random number dot next in parentheses 1, 1000 plus random number dot next double in parentheses. So this is saying that this random number is composed of two parts. The first part is a random number between 1 to 1000. The second part is a fractional number between 0 and 1. And now you may ask, why don't we just use the first part, the random number between 1 and 1000? You can also do that. Here we are adding this extra fractional random number between 0 and 1 just to create more variations in the random number. So for example, if you have the same integer random number of 1, but you may have different decimals, right? So in this case, we may have random number of 1.1 and then 1.11, 1.12. So we are creating more variations of this random number, which can benefit for our sorting. So if you have too many duplicated or same random number, it's not very good for our sorting procedure. So we add this double, the fractional number here to create these variations. Now let's click OK. And now we created this random number column, and we assign a random number to the column. And the next step is to sort the data, the non-key item data, by the random number. So let's collapse the for each row, and let's use a sort data table activity after the for each row. Here for the input, it's DT non-key item, and we are sorting by the column name. So let's go to the name of random. And we can keep the order as ascending. And for the output, we can override our non-key item. So we can do the DTN non-key item again. So this is to say we are going to sort our DT non-key item by random in the ascending way. And we are going to replace the sorted table with the original one, right? So we are overwriting it. Okay, so next, after the sort data table, as I said earlier, we are going to create another column named row index, random index, right? And then we can use that index to select the first 25 transactions. So let's use another add data column after sort data table. For the input, the column name, we're creating this column of random index. And we are creating the extra column in the DT non-key item. Okay. Next, we are going to assign values to the random index for each transaction. So we are going to use the for each row again. For each row in the DT non-key item, we are going to assign the row.item in parentheses random index. We are going to assign the random index into the value. So let's type into the following VB expression. DT non-key item dot rows dot index of row. So this is saying we're assigning this random index, the column, the value of the index itself. So now click OK. Now we can filter the data by the random index column. So we can collapse the for each row and then use another filter data table activity. Inside the filter wizard, here, let's click keep. And in the column, we are going to filter by random index. And the operation is smaller than, we keep it. And for the value, so here, the 25 is actually the number of transactions. So we actually created this variable in the first sequence, and we saved the variable as num_ran_trans, right, which represent number of random transactions required. So let's use this variable. So the variable here contains the value of 25, right, from the sample selection wizard. So and here the input data table is DT non-key item. For the output data table, here let's create this new variable of DT rand non-key item, representing the randomly selected non-key item. And click OK. Now that we get the randomly selected non-key items, we are going to again input those transactions into the working paper. So let me open the working paper now. If you remember from our earlier sequence, for the first part, these are going to be the key items, right? And then we want to put the non-key items after the key items. So here the question is, how do we know from where we are going to insert the non-key items? So we are going to use the same logic as what we did, used before, which is we are going to read the existing table here. For example, if we have any transaction here, so let's say these are the key item transactions, right? We read the existing table until here, and then we count the number of rows, and then we insert from the last row plus 2, right? If you remember. So we are going to do the exact same thing here. So let me clear this. Here, so we are going to use, so first we are going to use Excel application scope. And for the workbook path, it's working paper.xlsx. And we are going to use the read range from the Excel activity. Let's change the sheet 1 into sample selection and leave the range as blank because we want to read the entire table. And let's create a new variable in the output named existing table 2. Because earlier in the previous one we have existing table, right? Let's distinguish that with existing table 2. Now let's use an assign activity. And here let's create a new variable named last row 2. Here for the VB, it's going to be existing table 2 dot rows dot count. And we can also change the variable type of the last row into integer. Here, so let's change it into integer. Okay, so now we can use the write range activity and put it after the assign. And we're going to write to the sample selection sheet to the cell of A concatenated with, in parentheses, last row 2 plus 2 outside the parentheses dot to string. So this is the same as what we did earlier, right? So if you look at the VB expression, it's like this. And we're going to write the DT randomly selected non-key item to that into that range. And in the end, we are going to save the workbook. Now let's save our work and close the Excel. And let's run our automation so far and see how it works. Now let's go to the project folder, working paper. And as you can see, first we have all these key items selected and inserted here. And we have 25 randomly selected non-key items inserted right after the last key item. And you can tell from the key item value, right? The key items are indexed that have the value 1, and non-key items have the value 0. And this column is actually the random column that we created. So here you can see that it has the random number integer plus the random fractional number, right? So earlier I explained why we want to add this fractional number as part of the random number. And here you can see that for the integer part, most of the transactions here share the same integer, right? Like we have several 1s, we have several 2s, several 3s, but by adding this fractional number, we are creating the variations here. So when we sort the transactions, it's easier to do this ascending or descending order. And here, this is the random index. So as you can see, we first sort the transactions by random number, right? And then we assign the index number to the random index column. And then we filter by the number of random index. So we select all the transactions whose random index is smaller than 25, which is the required number of random transactions. And we can also see that the screenshot is here. Now, our next step is to insert the details of this sample to the cells in yellow. So we need to fill out the client name, the period ending, number of transactions, dollar amount of transactions, number of transactions for the key items that we selected, as well as the dollar amount. Also, the number of transactions for the selected non-key items and the dollar amount and total sample, and the upper and lower limit. So our next step is to fill out these blanks. And before we go, let's delete whatever is here, because later we want to run the automation again and save it.